we'll formally start the session. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Nicola Taylor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Scotland Is. And if you don't know who Scotland Is are, we are a membership organisation who also act as a cluster management organisation, essentially acting as the trade body for the digital tech sector here in Scotland. So today is a very special day for us, as today marks the first day of Scotland's National Innovation Week. And to mark this occasion, working with long-time Scotland Is members Jump Digital and partnering with the team at Bergman Holt, we have launched a research report around the role of the Chief AI Officer in the UK. And I will pop the link to that to anybody who would like to read more about it into the chat function here. This Thursday, we host our annual digital conference, ScotSoft, which covers a mix of technical and leadership talks across 6 streams. And this year, we'll also host the flagship event of Innovation Week, which is Scotland's National Innovation Summit. Tickets for ScotSoft have unfortunately closed, but our wonderful events producer, Kat Blair, is on the call with us today, and I'm sure if anybody is still keen to get themselves a ticket to come along, then if you talk nicely to Kat, she will help to accommodate that for you. There is a whole host of activity taking place as part of Scotland's National Innovation Week, and you can find out all of the details about all of the activity that is taking place on Scotland's National Innovation Week website. Again, we'll put the details of that into the chat for you. Today's session, for those of you who have joined us, is being recorded, so we would ask you to put cameras off and mics off, and we will facilitate any questions in the chat box towards the end. Anyway, that is enough about me and Scotland Is. On to the matter at hand. In today's global landscape, innovation isn't a slogan, it's our engine of competitiveness. The countries and regions that systematically turn technology investment into productivity, resilience, and export growth are the ones that lead. Here in Scotland, we have all the ingredients. We have world-class research, a dynamic startup scene, growing capability in data, AI, cyber, fintech, health tech, and a collaborative public-private ethos. The question is, how do we turn those strengths into sustained economic impact at national scale? And that's why today I am delighted to welcome Professor Dr. Howard Rubin, renowned technology advisor and data-driven strategist. He will help us move beyond industrial age models toward a forward-looking framework for performance in the digital era, what to measure, how to act, and where to focus, from compute capacity and digital sovereignty to the emerging quantum economy. Now, a quick note just to advise that we will have a presentation by Dr. Howard, and we will also include some live polling and an audience Q&A. So please use the chat function throughout, and we will put as many of your questions to Professor Rubin as time allows for. The first poll has an other option as part of the questions in there, and we would ask that you put there, if you're going to use that as your kind of selection, can you also put what the other option is into the Teams chat function for us there. Our goal today is practical. Leave with a clearer view of what to do next as leaders, policymakers and ecosystem partners to make Scotland even more innovation ready and innovation productive. Now, earlier this year, the Technology Economists launched a first of its kind certification course, which is designed to equip professionals with the skills to lead strategic IT investment across organisations globally. Developed in partnership with Scottish education technology company Jump Digital and long-time Scotland Is members, the course integrates Jump's new AI-powered education tools to personalise learning and enhance engagement and outcomes. And we will pop more details of that into the chat for you as well. Good news for everybody on the call today. We are offering the introductory module to the Technology Economist course free of charge to everybody who has joined us today. And 2 members who are on the call and stay through to the end will also get to access the full course free of charge as well, and that's worth up to 60 CPD credits. So we will announce the winner of those 2 courses at the end of today's session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Howard Rubin, a global technology economist and advisor to governments and Fortune-level enterprises. With 3 decades of evidence-based analysis, he maps how technology investment translates into productivity, competitiveness, and growth, and what leaders can do to bend the curve. So, over to you, Professor Howard.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it very much, and I'm very proud to be part of this event this week. And actually, the 3 decades was just mentioned by Nicola. Well, actually, I visited Glasgow 3 decades ago, working with one of the banks who wanted to establish a technology foothold in Scotland. So that's sort of amazing. Number 2 thing I think you should know about me, that'd be number 3 also, is that she did say professor. If my wife had walked into the room, she'd say I'd be able to talk whether anyone was in a room or not, or even not even awake. So stand by for a blazing 38-slide panel presentation. And number 3, at the very end of the presentation, I will tell you what I think is Scotland's greatest innovation, which will actually be quite a surprise. So why don't we start going to the panels, and hopefully they will come up. One other thing in terms of talking about the topics of invention, innovation, and technology, one thing that's not very well known about me is in the 1970s, I decided that it would be very good to do presentations on a screen like this. And I developed actually the great-grandfather of PowerPoint. And when IBM came out with a PC, I said, I have this great product that you may want to put on your platform. And IBM kindly said that they didn't think anyone would ever want to do a presentation on a computer screen. So that's a bit of invention and innovation history. But anyway, I'm proud to be part of the National Innovation Summit. And why don't we go to the next panel? And I don't think I need to tell you about the great history that you have in Scotland in terms of innovation. I just want to see that the panel is actually going to move up. Let's see. I shouldn't have said anything about PowerPoint because now it's attacking me. But anyway, the next point I wanted to make is that, in fact, we're getting there. We just have to get this, okay. That a piece that I wanted you to see here is that in fact, innovation is being tracked. And if you haven't looked at the World Intellectual Property Organization, it just wanted you to see where things stand right now. They have a ranking of about 80 different parameters, and they rank Switzerland as #1 and Sweden #2, and United States, that was the bump in the road on there. But also be very clear that Great Britain just sits right up there near the top. So I thought that may be an interesting piece of information for you, because I'm very focused on metrics. Actually, one metric I neglected to give you, if you see I'm in a very casual shirt today and things like that, I am actually in southeastern Florida in the US, and I have to also warn you that if you hear any things that sound like explosions or flashes, I am not in any kind of war zone. We had, in terms of metrics, we had 9,137 strikes of lightning within 10 miles of my house since September 1st. So with that in mind, why don't we go up to the next panel and get to the contents of the presentation today. And really, I mean, I don't have to tell you about this, because the Innovation Week is actually the reason for this, that you're a nation of innovators, creators, and problem solvers. And I think when I sort of separate out Scotland, even from the rest of the world shortly, you really see where you stand in a different light. And your business minister had actually a wonderful statement to say about all this stuff. And you are at the forefront of the next wave of transformation technologies. And I said, it was recognized this early on. I said 3 decades ago when I was in Glasgow, I think it was the JP Morgan Bank and some other banks scouting the nation to see what should be done there. That came to light. So why don't we go up to the next panel, please? And we'll start to the details. So you heard some of this in my introduction. And if you take a look at what's going on here, and I'm going to make a case shortly that we've gone through sort of an economic era transformation. And even off this slide, we start taking a look at various economic eras that existed. We can start, there's an agricultural economy, then things went to trade, then things went to industrial economy, and we started to see this information economy emerge. And now we're in what we consider to be, I consider to be a technology economy. And actually, I have been involved with, especially in the US and the Philippines and India, with heads of state. And in 2013, President Obama asked me to address the National Economic Council, and the text of the big pieces are out on the right there. But in fact, I was making the point that even for the US, and this gets quite interesting, if you want to compete, you're going to have to invest in technology and innovation and the required education to bring the US up to a competitive position. And the competitiveness of the future is going to be involved by looking at firms that digitize, and the economy is going to shift. Because if you look at what I call the technology economy, and we went back to the 1920s and we looked at what was driving the world markets. What was driving the world markets were oil companies, industrial companies, railroads, transportation of the type. And if we shift to today and you have the Magic 7, I believe it's called, and you look what's moving the world markets more so than any of the things that were moving it, going back 100 years in time, it may sound ridiculous, but it illustrates the shift, because that shift is now driven by the Googles, the Apples, even the Teslas is in the thing, which is transportation. But Musk considers himself to be a technology company, so everything has shifted, and we have Meta in there, we have X in there, we have a whole suite of companies that are technology. So the markets are moving today. The NVIDIA is in there, based on the technology companies more than anything else. So I truly believe, in my hypothesis, that we shifted from an industrial to an information to a technology economy. We've seen that shift, and the world needs new measures, companies, new ways of thinking about technology. And in the introduction, it mentioned the idea of the technology economist, which is an organization I formed with a team, because in the world of information technology, every organization has IT finance people, and that is absolutely critically important. But how do you connect what you're doing with your investments to outcomes? And that's what this is all about. And the outcomes are not just to company profitability. Those outcomes are to society, to national competition, their health, education, and welfare. So why don't we go up to the next panel? And there we are. So this is hopefully interesting to you, because this is a ranking of GDPs. And I'm trying to answer, why does the technology economy matter? It's no surprise, and this is published in various sources, the World Economic Forum and all over the place. US GDP projected at 30.5 trillion, China at 19.23 trillion. Now look at that big jump to Germany and India and so on. Let's go to the next panel, because we'll see where the technology economy stands. Technology economy, and I'm affiliated with firms such as Gartner, and they'll be talking about technology spending being about $5 trillion. Well, they don't count in-house IT. So the technology economy GDP, and I call that an IT GDP, is about $10 trillion. It's the third largest economy in the world, and it's barely explored. There's no Charles Darwin out there understanding its dynamics, but it's moving everything in the world markets, as I described before. There's another interesting data point on that chart, which might be shocking. It's not a part of my data, but it's from another organization. But cybercrime worldwide is above the technology GDP. The cybercrime GDP is approaching $10.5 trillion itself. So it's interesting. The more technology we build, the more risk there is of forms of cybercrime and defending against it. And the world of AI and then quantum computer, that number might grow very fast. Also, not only to create the issues, but also to defend against the issues. But the technology economy is the third largest economy. In a little while, we'll look at GDP growth rates. You'll hear GDP growth rates around the world of 3%, 2%, all single digits. Well, you'll see shortly the technology economy is the world's third, not only the third largest economy, it's the fastest growing, and I'll show you some data on that. And really what's happening over here, I'm making the case of why we have to be focusing on technology economics. And as a sideline that I didn't even put in this presentation, I'm sure you're all aware of the Davos meetings on the world economy and everything else. Well, personally, I think they're missing something. There should be a Davos equivalent of the technology economy, and that should be based in Scotland. We should be bringing technology leaders, policymakers, and everyone to understand this. And there's no better place than Scotland itself, with its rich history, to house such a thing. So I can't make that proposal, and I can't fund that proposal. Maybe an Elon Musk can, but it's something to think about. So why don't we go up to the next panel, please? So I'm sort of taking you backwards a little bit. And by backwards a little bit, I mean, I'm taking you back to the definitions that we're talking about today. So we have a base, talking about the patterns, the implications, and I've actually, you see, I talk a lot. You're going to hear the final words finally, and I'll describe that. But actually, in truth, after the final words, there's some other words, and I'll show you that too. So next, please. So I said we're going to hit some definitions first. But before we even hit the definitions, this is poll number 1, and this is the first poll we're doing today. So let me turn this over to the pollster folks to execute what has to be done. And the reason we're asking these questions, by the way, I'm going to wait for the results to come in, is what's the barrier to accelerating innovation? And does it have to do with your budget constraints or other things? And here we're getting someone better answer. I'm going to start answering anyway. All right. Let's see. We're getting, I'll say we're starting to get some results in on the side. And you can see the results on the side here. All sorts of things going on. Budget constraints, 62%. That is actually quite interesting. And there are actually, I should have budget constraints when it's low and sell when it's high. But anyway, the interesting thing about the profile here, and I guess we can go back to the presentation, budget constraints is overpowering everything else. And one of the interesting things in technology economics, and again, I'll just quote Gartner and Forrester and other sources, they talk about IT spending in 2025 and 26 increasing 7 to 9%. The thing that's not factored into those numbers that may relate to some of your budget constraints has to do with IT inflation. Because if you look at the premium being spent now for the right skills, and especially in the US with the H-1B visa program, if you're following the news with a $100,000 fee on top of that, that's going to really impact the offshore market, and India is being concerned. Number 2, the increase in prices of software and hardware, especially what's going on with chips and all the tariffs and things going on with that, and even the SaaS vendors and so on. A big factor on IT spending is going to be the impact of inflation. As I said, if an IT budget is increasing 7% and inflation is 6%, that will eat most of it up. And 2024 was a seminal year because IT budgets were supposed to increase by 4%, and 2024 was the first year in history that IT inflation ever passed the IT budget increase because it hit 4.8%. But anyway, you can see that budget constraints are a major focus right now. So why don't we go some of the content? We're going to do some more polls later to get the pulse of the audience here. So next panel, please. I have to get an accelerator for PowerPoint. So this may sound quite trite, but let me just hit some basic definitions so we have a set to work from and a baseline. So invention, doing something never made before. Innovation, creating and using of new methods. I sort of mentioned, and this is not about PowerPoint or any of this stuff, but I invented it actually in the 70s. It didn't even get into operation until I think 87 when PowerPoint as a product came about. The other thing that's sort of interesting, if you look at even the internet, the baby pictures of the internet, if you could take such a thing, was the DARPA network in the US, and this was 1969. Think about when the internet became available for general consumption. That was about 17 years later. And you look at any innovation, there's some kind of cycle. And the reason for putting these words up is I wanted us to also focus on patterns. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Invention, innovation, just what is technology? Study of practical, especially industrial use of scientific discoveries. I don't know if the person that invented the wheel really thought it was a scientific discovery. You have the steam engine, all sorts of other technologies, a television that Scotland is quite proud of and is an innovator in. But in fact, technology comes about. There's an adoption time from the invention to the innovation starts getting through to be used, and then it reaches critical mass. And the economy, the wealth of resources of a country or region. And that traces back to Adam Smith. And actually, that was the motivation for me getting into technology economics, because I felt the world is missing something. So invention, innovation, and technology goes back to my hypothesis. It's the foundations of competitiveness in the global economy. And we see that with everything in recent times, from everything from e-commerce to, in fact, the cloud. We see that with regard now to AI. We've seen that with everything going on in the world. There is, in fact, it shifts everything. But as I said, it's an unexplored area. It's a relatively new economy. And if you think about Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, we're 250 years beyond that. And no one really understands the economy fully because it runs every day, changes every day. Technology has been in the world of business and our society in terms of information technology since perhaps, and we can go back in time about 60 years. So don't expect that anyone knows fully how it works. So we need explorers, and I view technology economists also explorers in terms of looking at patterns. So why don't we go to the next panel, please, and explore this a little further. So you've heard from this before. Technology economy is the third largest. We had classical economics, and now we're going to focus on technology economics and invention and innovation and their outcomes in the world of information technology. So why don't we go up one more panel? Now this might be quite interesting to you, because suppose you start using different measures to look at the world economy, and we separate Scotland out from Great Britain and look at the numbers published for its GDP. And I'm just going to the chart on the right. You have a GDP of 313 billion. I'm using US dollars because it's easier to compare right now across the other data that I'm going to show you. In terms of looking at a few hundred, almost 200 nations, you rank about 46. If we look at your GDP per capita, it's 56,967 in US dollars, or 40,339 Great British pounds. You'd rank 15. If I look at the spending on the GDP basis, and we look at your IT GDPs, I call it, you're at $2,848. You are number 5 in the world. Where do you rank in all this kind of things? Well, your global GDP between Czech Republic and Finland. GDP per capita, you're between Sweden and Austria. IT GDP per capita, you're between Canada and Switzerland. If you go back to the earlier chart, Switzerland is ranked by the World Information Intellectual Property Organization as number 1. And if you look at the UN HDI, that's a Human Development Index, looks at wealth, quality, personal wealth, quality of life, health, and a whole bunch of other factors, you rank number 12. And if you look at the range, and even you look at the US benchmark for HDI is 92, US benchmark for IT GDP capita is 4,000, UK benchmark, your ranking changes totally in your second line here as we change perspective. So you may be 46 in the world economy based on GDP, you may be 15 in GDP per capita, but you're in the top 5 of IT GDP per capita, and you're ranking the UN HDI, which I'll show you shortly how that's related to the technology spend. You rank 12, you're actually ahead of the US. So I don't know if this will make the news tomorrow, but it's quite interesting to look at the economy in a new way. And I'm not saying that these are the world's final measures. I say it's critical that people start to explore this to understand a new look at the world. And I'll show you that new view of the world shortly. And we have pieces of that in the Technology Economist. So up to the next panel, please. So let's look at patterns. And I say we're all exploring patterns right now. And what patterns are about is just looking at empirical data, looking at almost analog data, and trying to figure out what's going on. So we're going to look at patterns in quite a few things. And in looking at the patterns, let's move on to the next panel, please. We're going to take a poll first. How confident are you that your organization is getting measurable value from technology investments? And measurable value means you have the outcomes and you can understand what those outcomes are. And you have choices of very confident, somewhat confident, not confident, or absolutely unsure. And value is one of the key questions that most organizations are asking about technology, and especially in the world of AI. And I'll talk more about that shortly. So we're going to do the poll now. So I think the poll will start to pop up shortly. So the first thing we knew that the first dominant issue was budget constraints. I wonder if budget constraints are holding back the ability to get some value. And are you confident or not confident you're getting it? The other thing you should think about as you're looking at this poll is, do you have measures of value associated with your technology? And that's either in business value, which could affect the company's operational efficiency and effectiveness, whether it's customer value in terms of your what they call your net promoter score or satisfaction, or even value in terms of getting new product to market and competitiveness, and other types of value which have to do with the ability to retain or attract employees, other types of value in terms of managing risk. There are a whole bunch of categories that we'd be glad to tell you about or send you. So I'm just interested to see if we have any poll results yet. I don't want to be silent too long. I used to be on television a whole lot on CNN, so we don't do dead air time. So
the poll results are coming through.
Okay, very good. I'm not trying to rush you.
Would you like to know what they are?
Of course, that's the idea. Anyway.
We're at 36% for somewhat confident, 42% for not confident, and 25% of responses have said unsure.
Do we get any very confident?
No, 0%.
Okay, that's the subject of a new speech. Anyone who wants to stay with me for another 5 hours, we can get on that. But anyway, we're not doing that today. Thank you very much. Why don't we go out to the next panel? These results are very, very interesting. So I don't think I have to tell you much about patterns, but imagine you were Charles Darwin and you went out to the Galapagos, you went to an island and you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on there. Well, it helps you understand the world. It may help you understand what's coming next and learning about and developing theories of evolution, and may give you patterns to solve problems in the future. It's very interesting when you look at the current state of AI, generative AI. Generative AI is trying to look at patterns, and that's the underlying thing about it. It's basically a big token generator that looks at patterns in words and patterns in other things and puts them together. So patterns are key. So let's take a quick look at some patterns, because the patterns that are very interesting that are applied to the technology economy, and next panel, please, have to do with how long it takes till something gets adopted and used. And this is a very busy panel, and I believe the attendees will get copies of this. But two things to watch over here. You start to take a look at that black line, and that buildup has to do with the world's GDP. And look at how it accelerated after the 1940s and post-World War II and all the investment going in over there. And over here, you have all sorts of things going back to 650 BC, believe it or not, about what's going on, and economic circumstances like the recession. But here we have the internet on this, and we have trade wars, all sorts of things that are happening. But look at the shape of that curve. So there's an economic pattern that looks like exponential growth after some point in time, but how it crawled up from way back in history to now, and all sorts of events, not only technological, but societal, geopolitical, and everything else going on. And if you haven't looked at the World Economic Forum's view of current risks and things into the future, you can overlay it of something like this. So, but why don't we go on, because we'll get out of the economic patterns. Next panel, please. And we'll start to look at adoption panels, because there are things that are called innovation cycles, and you can see the reference right here. But look at the various cycles that are going on. The first wave, the water power, the textiles, the steam power, now our industrial revolution stuff, electricity, chemicals, electronics, digital network, AI, and so on. What I want you to see that there are waves of these things. The adoption of innovation doesn't come instantaneous. And you have some text on the top here that talks about railroads and aviation and things like that. There's something we'll see shortly called the Kondratiev wave, and he was a Russian economist, and he predicted that there's certain amounts of time before things actually hit. And in general, it historically has taken about 17 years for an innovation to get to full level adoption. I gave you the example of the internet, 17 years. I gave you examples, and cloud is an interesting thing. If you think about the notion of cloud, Google introduced that formally in 2005. When do we start to see more and more adoption of cloud service providers? We're getting into 2021, 22, 23, almost 17 years. That's not an immutable number. It's not like pi, but it takes a while. And one of my other hypotheses is there's a lot of frustration now with AI. There's a lot of discussion about the potential of AI. There's a lot of frustration with not getting the results. And MIT just published a study that said 95% of generative AI projects are not producing expected results. We're just at the point in time which is still early on, and it's going to take a while till the technology matures, until we can get results, until we can even measure the results. So why don't we go up to the next panel, please? And this all has to do with the change and the shift in terms of adoption cycles, have to do with the accelerating pace of change. And this particular panel just points out particular events that have happened, everything from early computers, and there was the ENIAC, which isn't on here, and the UNIVACs, and the Apple II computer, which is actually what I developed the grandfather of PowerPoint on, and even the introduction of Macs. And this goes on during time. So the idea of putting these panels in front of you is look at the shapes of the curves, and there's a pattern in the shapes of the curves, and that'll help us to understand what we're having and what will actually happen to go out into the future. So next panel, just so we have patterns, we have acceleration of change, and now it's on to what are the implications of all this stuff, and that becomes critical itself. So next panel. with the number of panels I have, you have to realize I'm spending about a minute and a half per panel. So it's a murderous pace, but hopefully I'll have a chance to pull all this together. So we're ready now for the final poll. I don't know if you want to celebrate that or not, but which emerging technology will have the greatest impact on your organization in the next 5 years? Is it going to be AI? Quantum computing is quite interesting because quantum computing is not quite there yet. But someone once asked me, what comes after, what comes next? Well, when what comes next was artificial intelligence, what comes after what comes next is quantum computing. And you're seeing the major companies in banking, specifically like a JP Morgan, investing a lot in quantum computing, and technology companies investing in quantum computers, whether it's Google or somebody else. And there's green tech and sustainability tech, because that's taking a major place right now in the world in terms of what's the impact of all of this, not only in just power generation, but what it's doing to the natural resources. And there's biotech. And this is where it was pointed out, if you have another idea what you'd like to include about what technology will have the greatest impact on your organization, type that in chat, because it's impossible to build a full list. I guess there's a lot of folks who are going to say hi, but we're talking about the next 5 years. So 5 years from now, if we're looking at moving into the 2030s, maybe quantum will have a big effect. And I don't know how many of you are experimenting with quantum. We probably should have asked that as one of the questions. So I'm wondering, do we have any poll results yet on this?
We have 83% have answered artificial intelligence, 8% quantum computing, 8% green tech / sustainability tech, and 0% for biotechnology and other.
Okay, this is not unexpected. I was glad to see green tech and sustainability showing up there. And quantum is interesting. And if you look, by the way, on my background, I'm involved with the World Waterkeeper Organization, and we actually have waterkeepers going in your part of the world. So I got involved in that in 1996, the same year I visited Scotland. So anyway, there may be some connection. Why don't we go to the next panel? Okay. So going back to what we were talking about, let's think about the technology economy another way. I said it's approaching $10 trillion. That's $1,250 US dollars for every person on the world. And it's the world's third largest economy. So I've told you that, but now this is like buying everyone on the planet an iPhone every year unless the prices go up. So it's pretty wild what we're investing in and where the money is going, and looking at it in other times. And I said it's growing at this major rate. It's growing between 7 and 9% a year, while the regular GDPs are growing at typically 3% or less, except in some other parts of the world. But it's a major gap right there. So let's talk about measuring and modeling the technology economy, and go up to the next panel, please. Because there's another factor coming in. Shortly, you'll see a list of GDP by country and IT GDP by country. And the gap between, and I call this digital disparity. Digital disparity is the gap between the countries with the highest and lowest IT spend per capita. And actually, when you start correlating that with other things, and correlations are dangerous because you don't know if they're causal or not. But why don't we go up to the other panel, and you'll see some sort of astounding, what I consider astounding results. And I say, this is exploratory. So this is the base data of the rank in the country of GDP per capita. And this shifts around depending what countries you include and how you count it and when population was taken. But you'll look at the range of the list. The ratio of the highest to lowest in the list of GDP per capita is 182 per 1. If you look at Singapore technology spend per capita, this was when this was done, is about $363 per capita. Central African Republic is $7 per capita. So again, these numbers are always in flux based on changing, but I want you to see the range. The ratio of GDPs is close to 200. The ratio of technology spending per capita is around 400. That is technology wealth and what it looks like around the world, or technology investment. In a moment, we'll talk about how to measure it, but next panel, please. If you like statistics, this is an interesting chart. The x-axis is IT GDP per capita, and the y-axis is the UN HDM, Human Development Index. look at the shape of that curve with an R squared of 0.87. So I can't guarantee that anything is going on. There's a tremendous cluster at the low end of this, the sub $1,000 per technology spend per capita. But when you start getting all the way out there, 7,000 in areas like that, just for 191 countries, you start to see there's a pattern here. Again, this is, I said, you're all explorers. This is like going to the digital Galapagos, and you'll see that in a moment too, and saying, what the heck is going on out there? And this is really a new science and how we can explain it. And is there a cause and effect here, or really what's going on? So we'll go up to the next panel, please. So we're looking at the Human Development Index. And I would claim, and I know this is a busy panel, if you go to our techeconomists.com website, you'll see these side by side. I think new measures are needed because the technology economy indicators and industrial indicators, if you put them side by side, you start to see what, what's the world technology, what's the world, I'm sorry, the world GDP look like, that's the right-hand column, versus technology and economic indicators. And you can start to see the differences. But if you start to track things like IT inflation at 4.8% when we did this last June, and we look at world inflation 3.4%, and we look at IT GDP by nation, and we look at other factors, and actually the world, what we call the IT intensity, we even have a stock ticker on our website. We call it Technology Leadership Index. So instead of the Dow Jones, instead of the Standard & Poor's, instead of any of the Euro indices and things like that, start looking at global technology leaders. Those are the companies that are spending on technology and getting clear value out of it for every of 20 sectors. And is that outperforming those other indices? And the answer, it is. So the simple point here, and I know this is a busy panel, you can explore it further. If you start to look at technology economic indicators, I talk about technology GDP, technology leadership indices, technology inflation, that starts to relate to really what's going on with like the magic 7 of how world markets are moving. So the hypothesis is we've changed economies. We've shifted from agricultural to industrial and trade to information to technology, and new measures are needed. So we've started to experiment with these new measures, and it would be fun to see how Scotland really ranks in terms of looking at all these new measures at a country level. And we go up to the next panel, please. You'll actually be able to, and this is not an advertisement for the website because there's no charge in you. We've created a map of the globe in terms of the digital Galapagos. So you can click on any country and start to learn about what's its HDI score is, what's its GDP per capita, and IT GDP per capita, and start to see what that looks like. So we're also saying that not only are new indicators needed, but we get a different view of the globe out here by looking at it. And you could actually spin this around in real time in 3D and experiment to see what's going on. And if you go to the next panel, because I do so much with the US and at least in the past, this is the data you saw before. We can skip over that because you saw some of that. That relates to the previous panel, I'm sorry. But even looking at the United States, and you can actually go to the map of the US, and we probably can create a map of Great Britain in detail and where you stand. You can start looking at IT spending per resident, and you can start looking at the different states here with New York at about 5,000 IGDP per resident and the bottom group. And look at the spread over there. It's from $1,500 to $5,300. We're looking at a spread of 3 to 1. And there are other ways we can look at this. And a matter of fact, I've looked at state spending and things like that. So why don't we go to the next, at a level below this per person in a different way, and go to the next panel, please. This is spend per citizen that I showed you. Start to look at this in some of the details, and this goes even further than we had before. The US is a digital Galapagos. The world is a digital Galapagos. And go ahead, one more panel. The issue is we have all these things going on, but what does value look like? And I sort of made a statement early on that if you're doing things with technology, there's a book called Discipline of Market Leaders by Tracy and Wersmer that I've used in some of my graduate courses. What does value look like? Value looks like operational excellence, operational efficiency, customer intimacy, and product differentiation and leadership. There's this thing called the Balanced Business Scorecard that was developed by Kaplan and Norton, and I was part of that team that says, well, there are other ways of measure things. We can look at how things look in terms of our finances, our customer, our processes, and our learning and growth. There's a Gartner taxonomy. The Gartner taxonomy says, where are you spending your money? Is it to run or grow the business? But that isn't enough because what are the subcategories of that? Then the things like the Human Development Index. So there's no shortage of structures, by the way, to start looking at value. And you need to overlay the value of the measure on the measures I've just showed you before, which relate to the input, which is the IT GDP, the spending per person. But even with a company, and this is all for profit kind of stuff, why don't we go to the next panel, except for the HDI? Come to the next one. And this is the area where I'm having the most, I don't know where fun is, but value takes many forms, because you're a government and you start taking a look at your GDP per capita, median income. What does your IT GDP have to do with anything? Well, the experiments we've been doing is looking at IT GDP and secondary school graduation rates. In the US, debt at graduation is key. Standard math scores, percent college educated, crime and safety has to do with incarceration rates and so on. The key is, for profit, we have very clear measures. For investment in society, we're really looking at things to do with health, education, and welfare. And there's a wide range of environments and things in different states. But this is GDP per capita targeted at IT spending and what it ends up doing to influence any of these variables and how these variables relate to what's being spent on technology, on our students, on our workforce, fighting crime and everything else in society, environment, things like that. So really what I've laid out here is there are a couple of different value scorecards. I hate to use the word scorecard, but that have to do with how do you look at the value of different areas. And even this requires exploration, because I propose we look at health, education, and welfare, and this has education and crime and safety. If we had health ones, it would have to do with the effectiveness of your hospital system, your medical system. And we even measure things in the US right now of almost what I had to call hospital visits, return hospital visits and things like that. So there's no shortage of measures, and we have a lot of intellectual capital on this thing. But the point I wanted to make is that there are three, at least, different ways of looking things that are looking at the for-profit, the not-for-profit, and the societal. So value takes on many forms. That may sound like a big platitude, but it is absolutely true. So next panel, please. And I said value is a big deal and can be measured. And actually, one of the things I invented is a metric having to do with what's called technology intensity. And we're able to relate technology intensity into 9 sectors of what it does. And this is right now working for profit organizations, where you can actually compute your IT intensity, because existing measures in technology of organizations are not enough. You can't look at technology versus revenue or turnover, as you call it. You can't just look at technology versus operating expense. You can't look at just technology spent per person. You need to look at technology in multiple dimensions, because then you're able to link this technology intensity metric, which is a multidimensional metric. And I actually proved and got a US patent on this thing, believe it or not, because I can prove that it correlates with operating margin. This is for profit. And if you go to the next panel, you'll see a profile of the banking industry. So look at all those data points. I think the 253 banks and that little curve on top, that's what we call the performance frontier. And that is the top performers. And the top performers give you the shape of the curve. And that shape of the curve relates to the previous diagram, because you can plot where everybody is on this curve and where they are in terms of technology intensity. And are they getting expected value? And the expected value could be that you have low intensity, high value, low intensity, low value, all over the chart. And we have a lot of papers published on technology intensity and how it works. But we actually have tools now for the technology economists, which allow you to be able to compute your own. And that's part of the curriculum that was mentioned early on. So as I whiz through this, next panel, please. Using this kind of model, by the way, and this is the x-axis has to do with technology intensity and the y-axis has to do with operating margin. All those blue dots represent different banks. And I put JP Morgan Chase on this chart because JP Morgan's data is visible. They have published their investor relations report every year, which I helped them design in 2022. But when I used to take the blue dots, the gray dots, and the orange dots and plot them as one, I got this weird shaped curve. This is like a Darwinistic kind of thing, because I found I had new species of business, because the blue cluster was the traditional banking, the digital banks were the orange, and the first sighting, the totally digital banks, the banks that we're looking at, the fintechs are out over there. So I'm just saying, in looking at patterns, you can discern things in the patterns, and discerning those things in the pattern may allow you to find things you never expected before, and you find new species of business. So I know I'm dumping a lot on you, so we're going to start to pull this all together now in the closing few panels. So next panel, please. So I talked about Darwin a whole lot, and it's interesting things, because the other thing that we haven't really looked here is how a technology economic view makes an organization more adaptive. And I think it does, because if you understand the economics, you understand the impact of technology on the change in business and the change in society and how fast it'll change. So he said it's not the strongest of species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one that's most adaptable to change. And I believe the technology economic view provides us with a contemporary view of what's going on, what the adaptability is. And part of the adaptability is having the talent in your organization to be able to assimilate the current technology and what comes next. And that becomes very critical. And that goes to your talent, your training, and your educational system, which is the basic driving factor of this particular view of being able to be adaptable to change. It's being able to learn, and we're going to come to that in a second. So next panel, please. So we've come up with the idea that there's a new role that has to be done. And some of the organizations in the US that I've been working with specifically have been focusing on that, and some in the UK actually, that organizations need to have a technology economist. This goes beyond IT finance. It has to do with the fact that technology choices are not a fashion statement. Boards might say, why aren't you doing anything on cloud? Why aren't you doing anything on AI? Well, you better have good answers, but you better also know the value and the outcomes. And in fact, the analytics of what you're investing in technology must be made from an outcome analysis perspective. And that becomes critical. Today's value, future value, and the outcomes. And this is repeating what I've said before. Outcomes manifest themselves in business and government and society and global competitive decision. And I worked with Philippines, for example, in Philippines, I think 90s came out that they have a great infrastructure to be able to become a global player. So you see help desks over there. India, we knew they had the skills and things like that. I've worked with other nations like Canada, came to me in 1992. They wanted to become a nearshore player to the US. How did they develop their organizations, the talent in the country? So it changed global competitiveness, because now you look at the leaders and what's going on, and it has to do with about, just like Scotland, in being able to deal with technology, introduce it, and be able to get value out of it and leverage other nations to become a global competitor. So it's invention, innovation, economy with winners evidencing rapid and judicious integration of technology and getting its value out of it. And I truly believe we're in a technology economy, and new measures and models or indicators are needed. And we're at the infancy of this stuff. So I'm not proposing to have all the answers, but I've been watching this for 30 years, have perhaps 90 million data points on this. And business and technology, 10 million of those data points are just pure technology to figure out what's going on. So up to the next panel, please. And being a professor, maybe this is my bias, but Peter Senge once said the only sustainable competitive advantage is an organization's ability to learn faster than its competitors. And Scotland led the world in invention. Now it can lead the world in technology economics. You have the whole platform right there. And all the data and things I'm talking about, and being able to acquire the data and model the data and integrate into learning, that's the organization's only sustainable competitive advantage. So I gave you sort of these general words. I said at the end, I would tell you what I think of one of Scotland's greatest innovations was, and this is nothing you're expecting, but go up to the next panel. And there he is. Actually, this was our dog Buster, and my wife's a veterinary technician, was written up in the Scottish Bearded Collie Club. And there's a whole big article about Buster dealing with Alzheimer's patients. And the reason I brought this up is that, I'll read the words, the Bearded Collie or Beardy is a Scottish herding dog whose history began in the 1500s with the introduction of continental European shepherd dogs like Polish lowland sheep who were crossbred with British herding dogs. So the greatest innovation in my personal life is actually here, Buster the Wonder Dog. And actually he was written up because this very special dog, and I said my wife's a vet tech, actually can work with Alzheimer's patients who are non-communicative, and they can write commands down in English, and he can follow flashcards, which is pretty wild. But again, that wasn't the point of the talk. But why don't we go down to the bottom and click on Buster and see what he has to say about this. He waves goodbye. So thank you all very much, and I'll turn this high-speed speech back over to a moderator. So thanks for your attention, and thanks for answering the polling questions. And we'll see if there are any questions from the audience, if anyone has still survived this 38 panel barrage.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Howard. That was really, really insightful. As Howard mentioned there, if you do have any questions, you can pop those into the chat for him just now, and I will facilitate those for you. Certainly, I have a couple of questions myself that I would like to ask, so I don't see anything specifically in the chat just yet, so I will kick off with some of the questions that I have. You touched on the fact during your presentation that you've obviously done quite a lot of work across the globe, and there was some talk there around the kind of patterns and how they affect what you're doing. But from the global work that you've done, what playbook patterns actually move productivity? So what are the kind of key patterns that kind of stand out to you as kind of moving things along?
Okay, there's two levels of productivity. I think one level of productivity is having a talent and educational base and perspective that allows you to assimilate technology quickly, understand its value and how to put it to use effectively, and also the timings. So there's one part which is a recognition function of what you're willing to take risks are and how to balance risk versus value.
Mm-hmm.
But number two is being able to put it to use, and that has to do with the talent base you develop in your nation. So the work that I've done, for example, in Canada in the 90s really said if they want to be where they want to be in the future, they have to have the training and such in their educational system. And you saw that in India too, because in the US, there had been a very heavy dependence on four-year college degrees. And in fact, there's so much you can learn in technical schools. So you have to differentiate which is suitable for a technical school, which you need a university degree, and do that and build a base for the future and have the content in your curriculum. And by the way, so I was a professor. I ran the largest minority-based computer science program in the United States for years in a public university. That was the City University of New York. But it's how to prepare for the future. The other interesting thing with regard to all this is if you're in a particular sector, it's one thing to learn by comparing yourself against others in your sector, but it's look to the sectors that are ahead of you. So it gets very interesting. If you're a bank, for example, and you want to know what comes after, what comes next, start to look at where the tech companies are investing, where the Googles are investing, and so on. And actually, my top doctoral student is in charge of the training education programs for Google. So it's quite interesting. So some of it is being able to look ahead, but as an educator, education is the foundation, but education does not always mean a uni degree or a doctorate. It means the skills you need for the future, but the system understanding what skills you need and what policies you need to make that effective, and how to encourage investment in innovation. And that's why Obama brought me to the National Economic Council. See, we can keep doing this so you can see I can actually give a short answer. That'll shock everybody.
Nothing wrong with long answers here. So a couple of questions have come into the chat now, so I'll ask those before I go back to any of my own. So, but thanks, Howard, a great presentation. How can Scotland practically use the approach you've described to meaningfully impact their performance?
I think there are two things. I think, and this may sound strange, but notice even in the data itself, I separated Scotland out. So you can show your power as a nation, because suddenly you went from ranking 15 to number 5, and that's not artificial. That's what a powerhouse you are. Almost in the United States, if you start looking at the US, and this doesn't portend the future, but what states have the most innovation capability? States have their own thing. So number one is to put yourself on a map and track where you are with a map. And then number two, it's things that you're doing already. And I said visiting in 96 on behalf of other companies in the US is seeing what's your educational system to do it. So you're already moving forward. It's focusing on what comes after, what comes next. And I must say, I don't know enough about what you're doing with quantum and things like that, but what you're doing with AI and other things you've done has been spectacular. But also, because there are now so many questions, this is about the value of AI itself, and so many concerns about business. And I mean, I went to ChatGPT and I asked it who patented IT intensity, and it gave someone else that was not me, and I hold the patent, so it missed that. So I sort of said, you're wrong. It sort of apologized. And you know what it said? It said, if you're going to get advice from ChatGPT, it needs adult supervision. Very strange. So how do you take things forward and get a realistic view of AI? Because adoption is there. So how can you help the world better understand it with all the things that you're doing in terms of how to get value? What are the cautions? What are the risks? And how to use it appropriately for society? So that's a long answer. Everything from looking forward education to really understanding the base of the power you have as a country, maybe in some other terms. And we're not starting to sell something, but you're really positioned on the input and outcome side to generate the first real set of technology economists for the world. And that's why I was serious about saying holding the Davos of the technology economy in Scotland. Your week here is the place that should be held. And the Davos stuff to me is a political forum, and technology comes into it. But I don't want to get in political. I work with the UN. And I have enough to say about that, but I'll stay away from all that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. So we've got a couple other questions here. I'm going to ask this one next. It's kind of related to the one that you've just answered there. But if you were advising Scotland specifically, what 3 actions would you prioritise in the next 12 months?
Okay. I think I go in reverse order. I put a keen focus. There's so much known about AI, is developing a way to truly track what the benefits are of AI to businesses and society, and letting people understand, instead of getting these generalizations that show up every day, AI will save us, it won't save us, it'll take jobs and things like that. Start to get the real data on that. There are a lot of opinions starting to cut through that by getting facts. So how strange it sounds, but it's a complex area. It's in its infancy in some ways. It will have massive benefits, but get the world to understand when you could expect it and start some research on that area, different from anyone who's selling something, the analyst companies. Number 2 is start, again, dig more into your curriculum. So how do you develop the workforce of the future? How do you get people that are sort of quantum ready? Because we know that's coming next. And then there's really digging in, and I mentioned the idea of measures, focusing really on getting good societal measures. And actually societal measures, even in Scotland, is how having the focus you have has changed your society and the health, wealth, and welfare of people. So it's 3 levels of things, but it's one, you're positioned at sort of the forefront of AI, not like open AI and the companies developing it, but exploring and watching its use from an independent platform, developing your system so you can start to absorb the new technology of the future. And we know quantum is coming up. It's interesting what comes after quantum, maybe the biotech. And then number 3 piece has to do with your basic foundation. So, and the societal impact. So these are opinions. I wish I could tell you everything is true, but I'm good at making stuff up. So anyway,
aren't we all? Aren't we all?
Yeah.
Conscious of time, but there is one last question in the chat here, so I'm going to ask it quickly before we move on to see who the lucky 2 recipients of the free courses are going to be. But what's a sensible risk-reward framework for adopting AI and quantum, especially, maybe looking at kind of public services and possibly, critical infrastructure as well?
Okay. Yeah, and that's what goes back to the 3 pieces I mentioned before. And I have more I can share on that, but it's really connecting the dots between what are the big things. It's health, education, and welfare, and maybe national competitiveness. So it's developing clear measures around those things. And what you're doing is you're looking at the delta, the change from where you are now, which is a baseline, to where it's going. And then we showed you the curves before you accelerate. Where are you on these curves? Is the absorption? So that sounds trite. It's really complex issue to measure the impact of a technology and figure out what those measures are. So again, and the Human Development Index is an interesting one that the UN has. It's not 100% of everything, but figure out what's the next evolution of even the HDI and how that could be improved. But again, it's looking at societal impact, health, education, welfare, and the basic values of society. And I'm not enough of an economist or a student of societal impact to answer that myself. So you need more minds on that. And that's why I said you should run a summit on that whole problem. It's more than just the innovation, the impact of the damn innovation and how to measure it. And that'll straighten things out. And I thank you for this is an amazing thing to be part of in my entire life.
Yeah, really appreciate you joining us. So thank you very much. So that kind of concludes the questions that are in the chat function. I have a whole host of other questions, but like I say, in the interest of time, I know we're approaching the end of the webinar. So I'm going to ask Fiona to share her screen. We've got a bit of a wheel where with everybody's names here who has participated in the webinar today, and we're going to draw 2 lucky winners for the free course just now. So we shall do that just quickly. Fiona, if you're ready, we can do that just now. So our first winner will be.
I take off people that work for me. Very good.
There we go. So Kunmaladi, we have you. So we will take you out of the wheel and go again for our second winner.
You should give a prize to who survived this thing.
There we go. And second winner is Mike Gill. So just a quick reminder that everybody who has joined us today will get access to the introductory module of the course. So we will be in touch with you all to follow that. And obviously, Mike and Kunalandi, we will be in touch with how you can access the full course. As a reminder, there's 60 CPD credits attached to that as well, which is wonderful. So to wrap things up, because I'm conscious of the fact that we've run slightly over time, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has joined us today to take part in this webinar, and obviously an extra special thank you to yourself, Professor Rubin, and thank you very much for all of the questions and discussion that we've just had there as well. I think it's obvious that today we have heard a very clear message around competitiveness comes from the measurable innovation, productivity, backed by the right capacity, policy, and partnerships. So lots to think about, lots to take away, and I just want to say thank you once again to everybody very much for joining us. Lots of things happening across Innovation Week. Again, I did pop the link into the chat there for you, and we'll be in touch with the slides and how you can access that introductory module for everybody, and obviously more details on how to access the full free course for our 2 lucky winners. Thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you. And Buster says thank you too. He's behind the door. Thank you very much. All right. Thanks again. I thank the team from Scotland for helping me. Bye-bye.
No problem. Thank you. We appreciate it. Lots of thanks in the chat there for you as well.